Entitled behavior often escalates quickly during stressful or inconvenient situations, but most people never imagine their outbursts could turn deadly. In this video, we are examining 8 disturbing cases where a Karen-like mindset and a total disregard for expert warnings led to fatal consequences. Each incident happened during moments of confrontation or personal convenience so common, you've likely witnessed similar behavior yourself. From ignoring safety barriers for a photo to challenging the laws of nature, these individuals believed the rules were merely suggestions, until the moment physics and reality took over. Yellowstone National Park is a landscape defined by extreme contrasts, breathtaking geothermal beauty masking an environment of lethal instability. Its thermal features are mesmerizing, but they are also unforgiving. Yet, every year, visitors ignore dire warnings, believing their personal intuition supersedes professional safety protocols. It was July 12, 2017, in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. The summer sun beat down on the famous geothermal basins, casting long shadows from the steam plumes rising into the clear blue sky. Hundreds of tourists moved along the designated boardwalks, marveling at the vibrant colors of the bacterial mats. The air was thick with the acrid smell of sulfur, a constant reminder of the superheated cauldron bubbling just inches beneath the Earth's thin crust. Among the visitors that afternoon was 52-year-old Yvonne Chen. A retired office professional from Seattle, Yvonne was on a cross-country road trip, ticking off national parks from a meticulously planned itinerary. Those who knew her described Yvonne as someone with a strong sense of personal autonomy, often vocal about what she perceived as unnecessary bureaucratic restrictions. At Yellowstone, the warnings are unequivocally clear: stay on the boardwalks. The ground in thermal areas is often nothing more than a fragile mineral skin over boiling, acidic water. Yvonne, however, viewed these barriers as an impediment to her authentic experience, believing the Park Service was being overly cautious for the sake of the average tourist. As she strolled through the upper Giza Basin, Yvonne became frustrated by the crowds. She spotted a small, unnamed hot spring steaming gently about 30 feet away from the main path. The ground between the boardwalk and the spring appeared to be solid, barren earth. Believing the warnings were exaggerated, Yvonne stepped off the boardwalk. Her boot sank slightly into the silty soil. She walked past a weathered sign half buried in the ground that read, "Warning, thermal area, scalding water, unstable ground." She ignored it. Her goal was to feel the heat and take a photograph without the artificial framing of the park's safety railings. As she reached the edge of the turquoise pool, she squatted down to get a better view. The ground here was compromised by years of acidic steam, creating a hollow subsurface cavern. Yvonne extended her hand, intending to gauge the water temperature. The moment she shifted her weight, the integrity of the crust failed. Without warning, the ground beneath her left foot collapsed. Yvonne screamed as her leg plunged into the boiling water. In a frantic, reflexive attempt to pull herself back, she shifted her entire weight onto her right foot. This sudden jolt caused the remaining shelf of earth to buckle entirely. Yvonne tumbled forward, her entire body submerging into the spring. The water temperature was later estimated to be over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly boiling, and highly acidic. Park rangers, alerted by a witness, arrived within minutes. They found Yvonne's camera and hat near the collapsed edge, but there was no sign of the woman herself. Recovery attempts were initiated, but the ground was too unstable for rescuers to approach the water safely. By the time specialized equipment could be deployed the following morning, the spring had claimed its victim. Due to the extreme heat and the high acidity of the water, Yvonne Chen's body had dissolved almost entirely overnight. The medical examiner's report later concluded that the cause of death was extreme thermal and acidic burns, resulting in the near-complete dissolution of organic tissue. It was a death defined by the precise chain of events set in motion by a single, entitled step off a wooden path. While natural wonders like Yellowstone present chemical and thermal threats, coastal landmarks offer a more mechanical danger: structural instability. At Diamond Bay in Sydney, Australia, the cliffs are composed of ancient, weathered sandstone and limestone, materials known for their aesthetic beauty and their tendency to shear off without warning. It was a Saturday evening in January 2020. The Sydney coastline was crowded with locals and tourists alike, all gathering to witness the sunset over the Tasman Sea. Among the crowd was 27-year-old Susan Vance. A social media influencer with a growing following, Susan's life was documented through a lens of high-end travel and fearless lifestyle photography. Her peers described her as someone intensely focused on her digital image, often prioritizing the perfect shot over the logistical reality of her surroundings. The local council had recently installed reinforced steel fencing and clear, multilingual signage along the Diamond Bay Reserve. The signs were explicit: danger, unstable cliff edges. Do not climb over the fence. These warnings were not suggestions, they were based on decades of geological data showing that the undercutting action of the waves had left the upper ledges completely unsupported. To a casual observer, the ground looked solid. To a geologist, it was a trap. Susan, however, found the safety fencing to be an eyesore that cluttered her composition. Witnesses observed her pacing the perimeter of the fence, looking for a break in the barrier. She reportedly told a friend that the warnings were likely a legal liability thing and that the best views were obviously on the other side. Finding a gap, Susan climbed over the barrier. She moved toward the very edge of a prominent limestone shelf, roughly 30 meters, or nearly 100 feet, above the rocky shoreline. She was looking into her phone screen, adjusting her position to capture the golden hour light hitting the water behind her. To get the framing she wanted, she stepped back onto a section of the ledge that extended past the cliff's main vertical support. The physics of the situation were absolute. The limestone ledge, weakened by wind and salt spray, could not support the localized pressure of her weight at that specific angle. A sharp, cracking sound echoed through the air, a sound many witnesses initially mistook for a snapping branch. In a fraction of a second, the ledge sheared off entirely. Susan was still looking at her screen when the ground vanished beneath her. She fell 30 meters, striking a series of jagged rock outcroppings before landing in the shallow surf below. Bystanders, horrified, called for emergency services, and a multi-agency rescue operation involving a police helicopter was launched. Paramedics reached her within 20 minutes, but the impact had been non-survivable. The medical examiner's report later detailed a catastrophic collection of injuries, including multiple skull fractures, internal organ rupture, and a severed spinal cord. The report noted that death was likely instantaneous upon the first impact with the rocks. The investigation concluded that the fall was entirely preventable. The safety fence she had climbed over remained perfectly intact, marking the exact line where the stable ground ended and the crumbling limestone began. Susan's pursuit of a unique image for her followers had led her into a geological dead zone where the laws of gravity took precedence over the main character narrative she had spent years building. While geological hazards are stationary, biological hazards in Tier 1 wilderness areas are mobile, unpredictable, and deceptively calm. In the western United States, particularly within Custer State Park and Yellowstone, the North American bison is a dominant force. Weighing up to 2,000 pounds and capable of sprinting at 35 miles per hour, these animals are frequently misunderstood by tourists who perceive them as slow-moving, bovine attractions. It was August 2022 in Custer State Park, South Dakota. The annual buffalo roundup had concluded, and small herds were grazing peacefully near the park's main loop road. Among the visitors was 62-year-old Barbara Higgins. A retired retail manager from New Jersey, Barbara was known among her travel groups for being assertive. She often boasted of her way with animals and frequently expressed frustration with park rangers who tried to micromanage the tourist experience. The park provides every visitor with literature stating a non-negotiable rule: stay at least 100 yards away from bison. These warnings are supplemented by "Bison are dangerous" signs featuring icons of individuals being tossed into the air. The logic is simple: a bison's comfort zone is a biological boundary. Crossing it is perceived by the animal as an act of aggression. Barbara, however, felt that her desire for a high-resolution, close-up selfie for her Facebook profile outweighed these warnings. Witnesses observed her exiting her vehicle and walking directly toward a large bull bison grazing near a fence line. Other tourists shouted at her to go back, but Barbara reportedly waved them off, stating she knew what she was doing and that the animal was just like a big cow. She approached within 10 feet of the bull, turning her back to the animal to frame her shot. She was so focused on the image on her screen that she ignored the animal's clear physiological warning signs, the rhythmic tail flicking and the low-frequency pouring of the dirt. The bull's reaction was near instantaneous. It dropped its head and charged. Barbara had no time to react before the bison's forehead struck her with the force of a small vehicle. The animal's horns caught her clothing and midsection, tossing her nearly 10 feet into the air. When she landed, the bull continued to trample her before retreating back to its herd. Emergency responders arrived on the scene and utilized a life flight helicopter to transport Barbara to a trauma center in Rapid City. Despite the speed of the medical intervention, the damage was internal and extensive. The medical examiner's report later cited blunt force abdominal traumas and catastrophic internal hemorrhaging. The impact of the bison's head had shattered several ribs and caused a grade 5 liver laceration, an injury that is almost impossible to repair in the field. The investigation into the incident included bystander video that clearly showed Barbara ignoring multiple verbal warnings from others. The Park Service used the footage as a grim educational tool, emphasizing that nature doesn't negotiate. Barbara's belief that her energy would protect her failed against the primal instinct of a 2-ton animal defending its space. In urban environments, the Karen archetype is most frequently observed in service-based settings. While these confrontations usually result in nothing more than social media notoriety, they can turn fatal when the individual's sense of entitlement overrides their awareness of physical surroundings. In the high-velocity environment of a city street, the main character mindset is no match for the mechanics of traffic. It was October 2021 in a busy commercial district of Charlotte, North Carolina. The midday traffic was heavy, and the atmosphere was tense due to local road construction. Among the drivers was 54-year-old Margaret Reynolds. An administrative supervisor known for her no-nonsense attitude, Margaret had a documented history of filing formal complaints against retail staff and service workers. Her neighbors described her as someone who felt that public spaces should yield to her personal schedule. The incident began with a minor traffic slight. A delivery van had momentarily blocked a turn lane, forcing Margaret to wait through one additional light cycle. For most, this is a standard urban inconvenience. For Margaret, it was a personal affront that required an immediate apology. Despite the delivery driver attempting to move on, Margaret pursued the vehicle into a crowded intersection. When both vehicles were stopped at a red light, Margaret made a choice that violated the most basic rule of pedestrian safety. She exited her vehicle in the middle of active traffic to demand a manager from the delivery company. Witnesses reported that Margaret was so focused on screaming at the delivery driver and pointing at his company logo that she became completely oblivious to her environment. She stood in the blind spot of an adjacent lane, where a heavy-duty municipal truck was preparing to move as the light turned green. The driver of the municipal truck, seated high above the road, had no way of seeing a pedestrian standing in the middle of a live traffic lane where no crosswalk existed. When the light changed, the truck began its forward acceleration. Margaret, still gesturing wildly and refusing to move until she got a name, was struck by the front bumper and pulled beneath the vehicle's heavy tires. Emergency crews were on the scene within 5 minutes, but the weight of the industrial vehicle had caused non-survivable crush injuries. The medical examiner's report later detailed extensive thoracic compression and traumatic asphyxiation. The report noted that the force involved was equivalent to several tons of pressure, far exceeding the structural limits of the human skeletal system. The police investigation, backed by multiple dashcam angles, cleared both the delivery driver and the truck driver of any wrongdoing. The footage showed Margaret intentionally walking into danger to sustain a verbal conflict. Her insistence that her grievances were more important than traffic laws led to a tragic, final confrontation, one where there was no manager to call and no policy to appeal. In the vast terrains of North America, weather-related road closures are a critical tool for public safety. During the monsoon season in Arizona or the spring thaws of Canada, localized flooding can transform a dry road into a lethal river in seconds. While emergency management agencies use barricades to protect the public, the Karen archetype often views these obstacles as personal inconveniences designed to waste their time. It was March 2023 in the outskirts of Calgary, Alberta. A sudden spring melt combined with heavy rainfall had triggered overland flow warnings across the region. Local authorities had placed heavy concrete barriers and road-closed signage across a low-lying bridge that spanned a swollen creek. Among those approaching the barrier was 49-year-old Sheila Vance. A real estate agent who prided herself on always finding a way, Sheila was running late for a property viewing. The physics of moving water are deceptively powerful. Just 6 inches of fast-moving water can knock over an adult, and 12 inches is enough to float most small cars. 2 feet of rushing water can carry away even heavy SUVs. The local Department of Transportation had closed the road because the bridge's structural integrity was being undermined by the current. To Sheila, however, the barrier was a suggestion that didn't account for the capabilities of her high-end, four-wheel drive vehicle. Witnesses at a nearby gas station watched as Sheila exited her SUV, moved a smaller plastic pylon to the side, and drove her vehicle onto the shoulder to bypass the main concrete barricade. A fellow driver reportedly honked and rolled down their window to warn her, but Sheila allegedly responded with a dismissive gesture, pointing at her watch to indicate her schedule took priority. As she reached the center of the bridge, the reality of the situation took over. The water depth was not the primary issue, it was the lateral force of the current. As the water reached the chassis of her SUV, the vehicle began to lose friction with the road surface. Within seconds, the SUV was no longer a car, it was a 5,000-pound boy. The current pushed the vehicle off the side of the bridge and into the deeper, turbulent creek. CCTV from a nearby utility station captured the vehicle spinning as it was swept downstream. Because of the water pressure against the doors, they became impossible to open from the inside, a phenomenon known as hydrostatic pressure lock. Search and rescue teams located the vehicle submerged half a mile downstream 2 hours later. Sheila was found inside. The medical examiner's report confirmed the cause of death as drowning due to entrapment. The report noted that the power door locks and windows had shorted out almost immediately upon immersion, leaving the occupant with no means of escape. The subsequent investigation highlighted that the road closure had been broadcast on every local radio station and GPS app for over 6 hours prior to the accident. Sheila's belief that her time was more valuable than the warnings of civil engineers led her into a trap that no amount of automotive technology could overcome. In the realm of modern photography and social media, urban exploring or trespassing on industrial property has become a trend for those seeking a unique aesthetic. However, active industrial zones, specifically rail lines, are governed by strict laws of physics and timing. In these areas, signs reading private property and danger, high-speed trains are often dismissed by those who feel their artistic vision or personal freedom grants them an exception to the rule. It was May 2022 in the countryside near Derbyshire, United Kingdom. The area is known for its historic stone viaducts and narrow rail trestles that span deep valleys. Among the visitors that morning was 31-year-old Pamela "Pam" St. John. A lifestyle blogger and amateur photographer, Pam was obsessed with industrial chic imagery. Her social circle described her as someone who felt that no trespassing signs were simply challenges to her creativity. The dangers of a rail trestle are absolute. Unlike a standard track, a trestle offers no runoff room. In many sections of the UK rail network, high-speed passenger trains travel at upwards of 100 miles per hour. Because of the way sound travels along the steel rails and the wind resistance of the structure, a train is often silent until it is seconds away. The UK's Network Rail warns that if you are on the tracks, you are in a death trap. Pam, however, wanted a specific shot of the valley from the centre of the viaduct. She climbed over a locked security gate, ignoring a sign that warned of high-speed traffic and live rails. She walked nearly 200 yards out onto the narrow stone and steel bridge, setting up a tripod and focusing her lens. Witnesses on a distant hiking trail saw her and attempted to shout warnings, but Pam was wearing noise-cancelling headphones, further isolating herself from her environment. At 11:14 a.m., an express train rounded a blind curve leading onto the viaduct. The driver immediately applied the emergency brakes, but a train traveling at high speed requires over a mile to come to a complete stop. Pam reportedly didn't notice the train until the vibration of the tracks became unmistakable. With the trestle being only inches wider than the train itself, there was nowhere for her to go. The impact occurred at approximately 85 miles per hour. Pam was struck by the leading edge of the locomotive and thrown from the viaduct into the ravine 150 feet below. Emergency responders located her body hours later. The medical examiner's report detailed multiple blunt force trauma and traumatic amputation, stating that the sheer kinetic energy of the collision made the death instantaneous. The investigation revealed that Pam had posted a photo to her Instagram story just 3 minutes before the collision, captioned, "Rules are for people with no imagination." The tragedy served as a grim reminder that a train cannot swerve, and the main character of a social media feed is still subject to the uncompromising schedule of a 400-ton locomotive. While many Karen fatalities involve physical impacts with nature or machinery, some of the most preventable deaths occur through a slower, more ideological form of entitlement, the belief that personal research is superior to a decade of medical training. In Tier 1 countries with advanced healthcare systems, a growing trend of science denialism has led individuals to treat life-threatening conditions with unregulated domestic remedies, often with catastrophic results. It was February 2024 in a wealthy suburb of Melbourne, Australia. 42-year-old Heather Millington was a prominent figure in her local wellness community. A health blogger and vocal critic of Big Pharma, Heather had a reputation for confronting pharmacists and doctors, accusing them of poisoning the public for profit. Her social media was a curated gallery of organic living and natural immunity advocacy. The danger began with a simple, localized infection. While gardening, Heather sustained a small puncture wound on her forearm from a rusty trellis. Under normal circumstances, a course of antibiotics, costing less than $20, would have resolved the issue. However, when the wound began to show signs of a staph infection, Heather refused to visit a clinic. She reportedly told friends that doctors would only try to manage her and that she knew her body better than any stranger with a degree. In the medical world, an untreated infection is a ticking clock. As the bacteria enters the bloodstream, it triggers a systemic inflammatory response known as sepsis. The clinical warnings are clear: high fever, rapid heart rate, and localized streaking. Heather's research, however, led her to believe these were merely detoxification symptoms. Instead of seeking emergency care, Heather doubled down on her main character, Defiance. She attempted to treat the escalating infection with highly concentrated essential oils, colloidal silver, and prolonged, sun-gazing sessions. When her fever reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit and she began to lose consciousness, her family finally called for an ambulance. Even as paramedics arrived, witnesses noted that Heather's last coherent words were a demand to see the head of the hospital to ensure no toxic medications were administered. By the time she reached the ICU, her body was in septic shock. Her blood pressure had cratered, and her kidneys had begun to fail. Despite the trauma team's efforts to reverse the damage with intravenous antibiotics and pressors, the infection had a 4-day head start. Heather passed away 48 hours later. The medical examiner's report was blunt. The cause of death was multi-system organ failure secondary to septicemia. The report noted that the original infection was a common strain of Staphylococcus aureus, easily treatable if addressed within the first 72 hours. The investigation into her death highlighted a tragic irony. Heather's desire to be the most informed person in the room led her to ignore the very experts who could have saved her life. Her entitlement to her own alternative facts resulted in a fatal outcome for a condition that modern medicine had solved nearly a century ago. In the final case of this series, we examine the intersection of political defiance and biological reality. During global health crises, public safety mandates are often implemented to protect the collective population. However, for some, these mandates are viewed not as protective measures, but as personal challenges to their authority and freedom. When individuals attempt to outmanage a virus, the results are often indifferent to their political convictions. It was January 2021 in Dallas, Texas. The region was experiencing a significant surge in respiratory hospitalizations, and local health authorities had issued strict orders regarding large gatherings and protective equipment. Among the most vocal critics of these measures was 58-year-old Martha Guthrie. A local business owner and activist, Martha had gained local notoriety for filming herself entering grocery stores without a mask, specifically seeking out teenage employees to berate them about constitutional rights and government overreach. The science of viral transmission is based on fluid dynamics and aerosolized particles. In a high-transmission environment, the risk is calculated by duration of exposure and the viral load encountered. Public health experts warned that large, indoor gatherings were high-risk zones. Martha, however, viewed these warnings as a hoax designed to control her behavior. To prove her point, she organized and attended an exposure party, where guests purposefully ignored distancing and shared food to demonstrate their lack of fear. Witnesses at the event described Martha as the life of the party, going out of her way to hug guests and mock the idea of invisible threats. She reportedly told a local journalist that she was the manager of her own health and that her natural strength made the government's rules irrelevant. 5 days after the event, Martha's main character and narrative began to collapse. What started as a dry cough rapidly escalated into severe respiratory distress. When her oxygen saturation dropped to dangerously low levels, she was admitted to a Dallas ICU. Even as she was being intubated, hospital staff reported that she remained combative, accusing the doctors of faking her charts to support a narrative. The clinical reality, however, was recorded on her CT scans. The virus had triggered a massive inflammatory response, resulting in ground glass opacities across both lungs, a condition that made it impossible for her blood to receive oxygen. Despite being placed on a ventilator and receiving the highest level of care available in a Tier 1 medical facility, Martha's condition became terminal. Martha Guthrie passed away 3 weeks after her protest party. The medical examiner's report cited acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, due to viral pneumonia. The report noted that her underlying health was otherwise good, but the massive initial exposure at the gathering had overwhelmed her immune system before it could mount a defense. The investigation into the cluster of cases originating from her party revealed that Martha was the index patient who had inadvertently infected 12 others, though she was the only one to suffer a fatal outcome. Her insistence that she was above the laws of biology led to a final, tragic irony. She spent her last days in a facility where the manager she had spent months shouting at was the only thing keeping her alive. What all 8 of these cases reveal is a fundamental disconnect between a modern sense of entitlement and the ancient, uncompromising laws of reality. In each instance, a tragedy was set in motion not by a lack of intelligence, but by a refusal to accept that rules, whether they are park regulations, traffic laws, or biological realities, apply to everyone equally. When we look at the remnants of these stories, the hollowed-out hot springs of Yellowstone, the sheared limestone of Diamond Bay, or the silent medical records of a sterile ICU, we are reminded that the universe does not recognize a main character. It only recognizes physics, biology, and the consequences of the choices we make. In a world that often encourages us to put ourselves first, these stories serve as a grim reminder that there are some managers you cannot scream at, and some boundaries that simply do not move. Which of these cases do you find the most avoidable? And have you ever witnessed a situation where someone's sense of entitlement nearly led to a catastrophe? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this analysis compelling, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the mechanics of human error and the stories behind the world's most preventable tragedies. Until next time, stay aware of your surroundings and respect the warnings you encounter. They were put there for a reason.